Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to have with me Stephen Cook, who is a senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations and one of the smartest people I know when it comes to foreign policy. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Jen. It's great to be with you and congratulations on the new venture.
Thank you. It's very exciting. And speaking of exciting, we live in exciting times and scary times. This was perhaps the most bizarre Munich Security Council in my memory. The Munich Security Council is when really people, not only from Europe, but from all over the world, come to discuss foreign policy, national security. The Vice President, let's start with the Vice President. The Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, said a whole bunch of really nice things and kind of scolded our German allies for not embracing the far right party. And this is in advance of a new election. How many things are wrong with this? Where do you begin? Why should he have not done this? And what does it mean that he has?
Well, this was, I think, probably the most bizarre thing to happen at the Munich Security Conference. There was some talk that I was going to go and participate in an event on the sidelines of this. I'm sort of glad I didn't end up there. Look, JD Vance, I mean, you have the Russians who have started a land war in Europe 3 years ago, who the Russians are emboldened by the election of Donald Trump and JD Vance. And JD Vance went to Munich and rather than bolstering the transatlantic alliance, chose to give a speech lambasting our European allies, the people on this planet who share our values the most. Whether you like the governments or not, they do stand for the same Western values that we allegedly hold dear in the United States. And instead, he gave basically a speech that he would have given during the election campaign about wokeism and so on and so forth. It was totally crazy. And then to make matters worse, he met with the leader of the AFD. This is not, I wouldn't put the AFD in the category of like a far right party or a new right party. These are straight up Nazis. These are straight up Nazis. And he met with them. And that clearly shook the German political establishment and the European political establishment. And what's the worst about this, and you have to believe that this is an intention on the part of this White House, is that it has long been a core global American interest for a Europe that is stable, that is whole, that is free, and that is prosperous. And we know people like Steve Bannon and people on the kind of Christian right, kind of Christian nationalist right, don't actually believe in this. They see Europe as actually a threat to Christian values and want to undermine NATO and the European Union, just fundamentally altering what has been an extraordinary success since World War II, both NATO and the European Union, in pursuit of that global interest of stability and prosperity and freedom on the European continent.
If this were the only thing to have happened, it would have been bad enough. But then we saw the appearance of our new Secretary of Defense, who essentially began negotiating away Ukraine's existence. He made a comment to the effect that they really shouldn't be in NATO. He made a statement that they can't possibly be returned to their original borders. This is in advance of any kind of discussion, any kind of negotiation. What was he doing here? And is that really the policy of the United States to throw Ukraine under the bus?
I mean, it is clearly the policy of the Trump administration. Uh, when I saw the statement, I said, "What are they teaching people at Princeton?" Which is where Hegseth went. I'm certain at the negotiation or conflict resolution course at Princeton, they're not teaching students to adopt all of the positions of your adversary, but that's precisely what Hegseth did. He said, no, NATO. It's unrealistic for Ukraine to regain territory it lost as a result of Russian aggression. And we're going to settle this based on basically that, which is basically the Russian position. Although Vladimir Putin didn't say, okay, he hasn't committed really to settling this conflict. This is just the Trump administration essentially taking the Russian position and wanting to impose it on the Ukrainians. mostly because the people around President Trump and President Trump himself have a thing. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. A thing for the Ukrainians based on this kind of narrative that the Ukrainians were helping buy. I've actually lost the thread of this. But once again, if you believe that it is important for Europe to be whole and free and prosperous, you cannot adopt the Russian position because believe me, once they're victorious in Ukraine, Moldova, then the Baltics. I mean, there's a reason why the Poles are really bulking up in terms of military spending, because they see the writing on the wall here. And I think that Hegseth's statement only reinforces, at least for what Donald Rumsfeld used to call, once called the New Europe, that the United States does not actually really stand against Russian aggression.
Almost as bad, or maybe it's worse. The administration appears to be entering talks with Russia without Ukraine present. This is sort of a recap of Munich 1938, in which two
Very good
powers
point.
are negotiating the existence of a third who has no say whatsoever in their future. What could possibly come of this? And we've already heard President Zelensky say he's not going to be any part of anything that he's not there and he's not negotiating. What
Right.
gives? What's happening?
I, yeah, and in response, French President Emmanuel Macron has cobbled together a hastily arranged emergency meeting that will include Zelensky. The most generous interpretation, not of what the Trump administration's intentions are here, but the most generous interpretation of what the outcome could be of this is more European support for Ukraine. Already, the Brits who will take part in this meeting have said that uh, they would deploy British forces on Ukrainian soil. And it would spur more European defense spending, but that's not the kind of thing that happens overnight. And I think that the best that analysts here in the United States can make of it is saying, well, this will encourage the Europeans and it will encourage the Ukrainians to sort of adopt an Israeli style defense posture. Um, but look, the idea of the United States and Russia in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, my territory, my natural territory in the Middle East, in negotiating away Ukrainian sovereignty is exactly what you said. There are echoes of another Munich.
Yeah.
And this is what is incredible, should be incredibly alarming to Americans, not just the American foreign policy community, but Americans in general. Um, Although I'll tell you, I was just outside of Washington for the past week. None of these things really resonate with people. How dangerous this actually can be, and that's kind of on us. We've never explained adequately why Europe is important to the United States, why stability in the Middle East is important to us, and so now we have a president whose communications team have been able to justify this as bold new thinking when in fact it's dangerous thinking. I'm all for new thinking. American foreign policy has grown stale, particularly in the part of the world that I spend most of my time on in the Middle East. But this is not, this is sort of reckless thinking, not bold thinking.
Ukraine survive without the support of the United States?
The Ukrainians themselves have said that they could not hold on without the United States. Now, there was some discussion during Munich or in the run-up to Munich that the Europeans would buy American weaponry for the Ukrainians. Um, Look, I'm not a guns and trucks kid, so I'm not really sure if that's meaningful because you've had to have American advisors helping and training Ukrainians on the use of American equipment and American tactics with that equipment. So I don't know for sure, but I do know that the Ukrainians have made it pretty clear that they could not hold on for very long without the support of the United States.
There are a whole set of Republicans who still fancy themselves as strong internationalists. They wouldn't use that word, but strong on national security. The Tom Cottons, the Tim Cruzes, the Ted Cruzes. What are they doing and what can they do to try to ameliorate this? Are they just hiding under their desks like they do with everything else these days?
Look, as a proud globalist and a card-carrying member of the foreign policy establishment, given my employment, I'm stunned. Stunned. Like you said, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham. There's a whole cadre of Republicans who, regardless of what their views are on domestic politics, have, as you point out, made themselves out to be these kind of very serious thinkers on American foreign policy and see the United States as a continue to see the United States as a beacon of freedom around the world. And they haven't really strongly opposed what has gone down in and around the Munich Security Conference. And you would think that they would, but President Trump has such a grip on the Republican Party that my guess is that if someone pops their head up and says, "Hey, wait a second," and asks serious questions about this policy, they will be attacked or primaried. On this question, is being a member of Congress that great that so what if you're primary? So what? Make the case if that's what you genuinely believe. I suspect, being a senator, being the trappings of a senator, it's like a little mini White House is better than being, some senior rainmaker at a major law firm. But still, at the same time, you have to think that principle comes in here. And we haven't really heard much from those bigwigs on the Republican side of the aisle who fancy themselves as foreign policy experts.
Well, as a member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate, who shall go nameless, he said, "This is the best job these people will ever have," meaning that the quality of the Senate is not so high that they would ever have the amount of attention, the prestige, the slots on Fox News that they do now. So they are desperate to hold on. Let me wrap up with kind of a big picture question. Whether it's Europe or whether it's the Middle East, where Donald Trump is making noises about what amounts to ethnic cleansing, throwing all of the Palestinians out of Gaza, there seems to be chaos, havoc, abandonment of all of the rules of the road that allow America to be prosperous, to be stable. What comes of all this? We haven't experienced a world like this. Take us down the road in the next few years. What could this lead to?
This is something that lots of folks have been thinking about, but I think my former boss, the president emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, put it best in an exit interview that he did with the New York Times just before he left the council, in which he said, this is the first time in anybody's memory, and probably the first time in history, where the United States is a source of instability in the world. And so that's a significant problem. I mean, just think about, we have stood on principle that the acquisition of another country's territory by force is illegitimate. Um, uh, President George H.W. Bush deployed 500,000 American soldiers to the Saudi desert in 1990 to reverse Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Now, here we have a president who's talking about, well, let's take over Greenland. Let's take back the Panama Canal. Let's make Canada the 51st state. Now, some of these things are ridiculous, Canada being the 51st state. But nevertheless, and I wrote this line, I'm very proud of it. One of the privileges of being the president of the United States is that people have to take what you say seriously, no matter how bananas it is. And so it is sending a signal to the world, including America's adversaries, that this is something that is legitimate, that you can take territory by force. And we're seeing that in the negotiation without Ukraine between the United States and Russia. What kind of signal does it send to China? So take from that, extrapolate that, a world where we're going to go back to, spheres of influence, where the big powers can decide how to slice and dice the world to their interests, regardless of any norms, because the norms have been thrown out. And then, of course, you have the destabilization of our domestic politics, which feeds into it feeds into this kind of the quality of our approach to foreign policy, which is equally destabilizing.
Well, the only thing I can hope for is someone whispers in Trump's ear that there'll be a Nobel Prize for him if he somehow saves Ukraine, if he backs off this extreme policy in the Middle East and brings a Saudi deal to the table. So maybe, if nothing else, vanity and ego can save us all. We
I
can
think
only
that
hope.
that may be the I think that's the hope. I think he thinks his Nobel is through a negotiation with the Iranians.
Well, that'll be a treat. Stephen, thank you so much. I hope you come back. I hope you enlighten us more. We should not forget that the United States is not only the greatest democracy, but is really the guarantor of the world's democracy, of stability, of really an entire global system that has kept us from World War for 70 years. And it's not nothing to throw
Right.
that away.
That's exactly
So
right. Well put.
thank you for joining
Thanks
us, and
for
we'll see
having
you
me.
next time.